On today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, I'm taking a deeper look at the 2022 Philadelphia Eagles schedule. Just how good are their odds to make the playoffs? Just how good are their odds to win this division? All that and more on this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in, everybody, to the fifth and final episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast. This week, schedule release week, I am Gino Cammilleri, your host. As always, joining you here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, your first listen of each and every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're bringing you all the sports from around all the leagues and all the latest news and insight around the Philadelphia Eagles here on LOE. And that's what we're going to continue on today. The schedule was released yesterday on Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. A lot of interesting notes from this Eagles roster release. I like to take a look at stretches, at who they're playing coming off of buys, what part of their schedule looks to be the easiest, where the road slip-ups could be. And I like to tie it all together with some Vegas odds. So on today's show, I'm going to go through some potential matchups that could be a potential slip-up. What is the hardest? What is the easiest? Where's a surprise win? And then to finish up the show, I'm going to take a look at what are the Eagles over under on wins. Could they win the division? How does week one at Detroit with the lines already out look to shape up here in the offseason? A lot of things are going to change. That line is probably going to change, but it's a good insight to see how the NFL is viewed by Vegas, and especially the team that we're talking about here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Before we get into that, Jimmy Kempski, I have to give him a huge shout out. Every single year, he puts out an article looking at the advantages and disadvantages of the Philadelphia Eagles schedule. So I just wanted to take a look at his latest article, go through some interesting news and notes that he put together. He is the best at what he does when it comes to the schedule, when it comes to compensatory picks. Huge follow here on Locked On Eagles, friend of the program. So I just want to take a look. So shout out Jimmy Kempski for putting this together. When you look at the beginning of their schedule, we know that that probably is one of the easier stretches, and rightfully so. Jimmy had put out that in those first few weeks of schedule, the teams that they are playing have a combined win record. Man, I mean, from last season in the first four games, they put together 21 wins out of those four teams. You look at the Lions, the Vikings, the Commanders, the Jaguars, that first four-game stretch against opponents who really struggled last year. I mean, they had a point differential minus 446 points with a win percentage of .316. You talk about starting hot. That's where the Eagles have to come out and catch fire right out of the gate. When you're going up against teams that could win 3 out of every 10 games, which struggled in offensive output and struggled in holding teams to score points, with what your expectations are, with the roster you have on paper, you would have to presume that those first 4 weeks, you have to come out of the gate firing. And I believe that week one, you should come out against Detroit, put the foot on the pedal, just like you did last year in that 44-6 outing. Continue to do things like that where you open up the playbook on a fast track there inside, get going early on, and just carry that momentum through those first few games. Because as the season starts to wind on, you're going to get into some areas where you have some disadvantages. That stretch where you play 3 straight road games at the end of the season before you finish it up with 2 home games against the Saints and against the Giants, that's going to be your toughest stretch. It's not easy to play on the road, especially in December, especially after bodies have been taking hits throughout the season and the injuries are going to continue to pile up. Teams outside of you that are competing for the playoffs. I mean, in that stretch, you're playing teams like the Saints. You're playing teams like Green Bay, Dallas, Tennessee, and the AFC. All of these teams will more than likely be fighting for playoff spots. So to flip the easy schedule in the beginning of the year, it gets pretty tough towards the end of the road. But the Eagles, good thing, they know how to kind of put it together down the road. So I think this schedule, with how it starts and how it finishes, should really play to the Eagles' strengths and should also give us an inclination. Maybe things have changed with the continuity that they have there year over year in the coaching staff, at the quarterback position, the luxury items that they brought in A.J. Brown, picking Jordan Davis. You only look at the landscape of this and say, you got to like how the schedule played out for you. You're only playing one team coming off of a bye. That's the Chicago Bears. But at the same time, you're playing 4 road games on short rest. Good thing is, 3 out of those 4 road games look to be pretty easy, in my opinion. Not playing world beaters. Only one game where I think you could probably have a potential slip up. But week 3 against the Commanders, short week. Week 9 against the Texans, another short week. Week 11 against the Colts, which I think is probably that toughest matchup outside of week 16 on Christmas Eve when you're playing your rival Detroit, oh my goodness, no, your rival Dallas Cowboys on the road on a holiday. Going to be a ton of viewership on that game. That's one where you're saying, okay, schedule makers probably could have helped out the Eagles a little bit, seeing that they're playing 4 teams coming off of short rest for an Eagles team that they haven't been the best responding to short weeks in the past couple years. It was Andy Reid who was great at that. He only, I think, lost 1 game in his tenure coming off of a bye where you're playing teams with a lot of rest. On short rest, too, he did a fantastic job. Nick Sirianni, he's going to have a lot under his belt to get going here in this schedule where in the middle, towards the end, it's going to be a lot tougher than the beginning. But all in all, you're playing arguably one of the top 5 easiest schedules in the league this year. You're playing a second position schedule where you're playing the second teams from around those conferences, where you're playing the Saints who are coming off of that schedule. You're playing the Cardinals who are coming off of that second place schedule as well. Some good matchups in there, some easier matchups early on, and the division matchups, you never really know what you're going to get week to week when it comes to that. So thank you, Jimmy Kempski, for putting that together. I highly recommend you go and follow him, especially in the offseason. Does a great job diving into things like the roster when you look at the perspective of who's playing well in the preseason, where schedule advantages line up, where the disadvantages line up, and he's the best follow for compensatory picks for the Philadelphia Eagles. Keep following along here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. When I get back, I'm going to do a little whiteboard fun for our friends here on YouTube, and those at home listening along, you could follow along as well via the airwaves. But stay tuned, because we will get back talking some tough matchups, some easy matchups, a potential slip-up spot, and a potential surprise win. But if you want to bet on all those games, and we're going to talk about betting to finish up the show here on Locked On Eagles, make sure you go to the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On Eagles podcast. BetOnline.net. It is the easiest and simplest interface to use. They have hundreds of player props. They already have tons of futures out there that you can bet on. That's where I got all of these lines for this show. That's where we get all of our lines for our LOE3 week to week. Make sure you go and bet on the NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs. Champions League final is coming up next weekend. Tons of important sports that are going to have a lot of money coming in on them. But there's only one place to do it: easy, quick, and seamlessly on your mobile device. Make sure you go to betonline.net today. Make sure you support the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. And make sure you go and bet responsibly at betonline.net, because it's where the game starts. All right, everybody, welcome on back to this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm your host, Gino Cammilleri. As always, shout out to Lou DiBiase. I had the flu earlier on in the week. He covered for me. Lou has the flu now. We're not even in the same city anymore. We just had that bond, man, and hopefully he gets better because it's great when we have us together on these airwaves. Going into OTAs, the schedule release is coming out. We have a lot of things to talk about on this Locked On Eagles podcast. So thank you for making it your first listen each and every day. And I hope you continue to make it your first listen each and every day as we actually get into the schedule, as we actually get into the season. Preseason is only about 2.5 months away. It's going to come back quick. And we're diving in to just what the Eagles can expect coming up here in 2022. To start off, we're going to do a little whiteboard fun for everybody here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, wherever else you get your podcast as well, to listen along. And we're going to start it out. What is the toughest matchup for this Philadelphia Eagles team? Well, there are a bunch of them. I went through a few. I kind of didn't want to choose the Green Bay game because I think that could potentially be a little bit easier than some people might think, with how the Packers have kind of lost their way a little bit on offense in terms of getting rid of Devontae Adams. It's not easy to replace the best wide receiver in football. They've lost important pieces on defense like Darius Smith. But I think there's one game that I am really looking forward to because I believe this is a horse versus horse matchup. I said this yesterday on the show. Week 5 against Arizona. Let's try and zoom in a little bit there. Not the best quality on the whiteboard, but week 5, you're going down to Arizona, a place where you're playing Kyler Murray, a quarterback who is on the same trajectory as your up-and-coming quarterback in Jalen Hurts. Obviously, a much higher pick, a much higher selection. What they have at wide receiver, though, is exactly what we have been looking for quite some time. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, they bring back AJ Green. They have all of that youth at that position. Their defense is one of the better defenses in the league. They got better in the secondary. Yes, they do lose Chandler Jones. You still have J.J. Watt there. It's going to be a tough test to go on the road, go to the desert, your farthest travel that you're going to have to make for the season to take on the Arizona Cardinals, who have a lot to play for, especially under Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury. There's a lot of talk. Is Kyler going to extend his contract there? They're going to be under the fire, and so will the Eagles. And after that first 4-game stretch, that's arguably going to be the toughest matchup for you because you played 4 teams that are in the lower echelon of the league. You're going to one of the teams that is competing to win the NFC, competing to play for a Super Bowl, and have a lot higher expectations than the Eagles do. So I'm going to go that week 5 matchup against the Cardinals should be the toughest matchup for this team. In terms of easiest matchup, yeah, you're playing one of the top 5 easiest schedules in the league, but we are going with the team. Your former head coach is coming back. You are going to play the Jacksonville Jaguars week 4. Week 4 against Jacksonville should be the easiest matchup of the season. And why do I say that? Well, you could look at the Giants, who knows with Daniel Jones, but it is an NFC East matchup, right? Those are never easy to predict. The Commanders, I think they're going to be a little bit better than some of those easier teams you play, like Detroit, like Jacksonville. To me, it was between Detroit, Jacksonville, and the Bears. I think the Bears with Justin Fields, I think he could be a threat, especially with his two-way ability to get some yards on you with his legs. Maybe that wide receiver core is a little bit better than we would expect. But Jacksonville, I have to trust by verification. They're always a team that, yeah, they're up and coming. They get Trevor Lawrence. They bring Doug Peterson in, right? And it looks like Trent Baalke and Shad Khan might be on the same page. I don't know. But at the same time, it's Jacksonville. You cannot afford to lose that game, especially with the toughest matchup of the season, which I think is going to come the following week. You have to walk out of that game at least 3-1, in my opinion, after those first 4. 2-2 I would be a little skeptical of how good they are actually going to be, but If you start out the season 2-1 going against that Jacksonville team week 4, and you can go to 3-1 before you start a stretch where you play Arizona, then you play Dallas at home, and then you have a bye week, that Arizona game with all of the emotion coming into that following week against Dallas, with those 2 weeks before that, you're playing Jacksonville, you have to win that one. And on paper, that should be the easiest matchup with what Jacksonville has, where they stand as a franchise, and where they're going to move forward to. Who knows in that division? I have to trust by verify, as I said, with Doug Peterson, with the playmakers that they have there. It's not going to be an easy transition for them to get better, and we know Jacksonville is Jacksonville at the end of the day. Come out of that game feeling good, start hot in that game, start hot in the first 4 weeks, because there are games down the line that you could be a potential slip up. And I mentioned this one yesterday. I think there's one game in terms of emotion that we have to look at that might be underrated, because week 10, you're playing Carson Wentz, right? Then the next week, you're playing Frank Reich. Week 11 at Indianapolis. That's the slip-up game to me. With that stretch where you're going to go on the road for 3 straight weeks, you're starting there in Indianapolis, right? You're going against Frank Reich, who now has Matt Ryan. Maybe a little pent-up frustration about having Carson Wentz pawned off on them last season and getting that first and third from them. It just felt good. And you're going into that stretch where you're going to play Green Bay in a couple weeks following that game. Actually, next week, you're playing Green Bay. Do you look ahead to Green Bay and say, after an easy matchup the week before, you're going to play Indianapolis, coming off of that Carson Wentz drama that's going to be filled in Lincoln Financial Field, what is the slip up on that schedule? It's Indianapolis to me. I think Indy is going to be a good team, that the owner has high expectations of the team. The GM and Chris Ballard, I know he's loved around the league, but really he's got to show a lot too after that Carson Wentz debacle. 5 straight years of a new quarterback. Actually, yeah, this will be the 6th year with a different quarterback starting for the Indianapolis Colts. They have a lot to play up to. I think you could slip up looking ahead at what's to come on the schedule. That game really does frighten me, especially going into Indianapolis. It's a loud building, not an easy place to play. It's going to be, I think it'll be a chippy matchup, especially with Nick Sirianni taking on his former, and he is the Padawan to the Jedi Master of Frank Reich. I love that connection. I think it'll be a good game, but I think the Eagles could slip up, especially against that running attack that is so versatile with Jonathan Taylor there. I would assume that with Matt Ryan, they're going to be more capable of passing the football. Watch out for that Indianapolis game, week 11, but also watch out for a surprise. That's why I love the NFL. There's always a potential win where you're like, okay, could we win this game or no? Do we just write it off? I think back to 2015, right? When the Eagles are playing New England, playing a team that we all thought, yeah, this team is going to get boat raced out of the building. They're not even going to stand a chance against this team. And they go out and did the exact opposite. They pulled out a huge surprise victory. I think the Eagles did this a couple years ago with Carson Wentz when he went on the road and upset Green Bay. I'm going to stick with a team that I just mentioned, week 12 versus Green Bay. Let me tell you what, this Eagles team has struggled mightily against the Green Bay Packers. They've had some success, but most of the time against Aaron Rodgers, they've been worked. But this time, I think the potential is there for an upset. That Jalen Hurts game where he comes in after Carson Wentz gets benched, that's his first time playing. I think there's a lot of retribution in this game, a lot of potential for a team with Aaron Rodgers, who they lose Devontae Adams, and that offense is going to be up in the air. Another team, like, I have to see that formula work on offense now. Having Devontae Adams, that could cover up a lot of holes for you, and it did for a lot of years. Aaron Rodgers coming off of a season where he didn't really play his best. Just kidding. He plays great every single year. That's just tongue-in-cheek, of course. He's going to come back with a fire under his rear end. He wants to prove everybody wrong. You have to play up to a championship/playoff level against that team. and why I believe it could be a potential surprise win, because Green Bay could realistically be fighting for the number 1 seed, and the Eagles could be fighting for a chance just to make the playoffs. So go into that game, no expectations, put it all on the line and say, hey, we could ball with the best of them. We could ball with Aaron Rodgers. We could ball with a top offense in this league. And that game, it might not be the toughest matchup. I think it's a little tougher schematically against Arizona, against the horses that they have on offense. I think this is one where you're saying anything can happen. I wouldn't expect them to beat Green Bay, but at the same time, it would be a great surprise. I think after week 11, if you do slip up to the Indianapolis Colts, you go out there in week 12 and you could potentially upset the Green Bay Packers. And we're going to talk about upsets when it comes to gambling when I get back here on the Locked On Eagles podcast to finish up this Friday edition of the show. And you're going to have to excuse me for a second. There is a spider here on my computer. I got to get rid of this guy. But the only thing sweeter than not having a spider on your computer is having a Built Bar to eat at any given time. They just sent us the birthday cake Built Bars. And folks, let me tell you, I am the biggest birthday cake fan on the planet. Ice cream, actual cake. I love it, but the Built Bars might just take the literal cake here. Not only are they nutritious, they're delicious as well. Up to 150 calories per bar, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of carbs, 17 grams of protein in a literal piece of birthday cake that is covered in 100% real chocolate. They have their churro puff bars that are out right now, are covered in marshmallow. They're delicious. Unbelievable taste for a protein bar. You bite into these things, you're saying, hang on, is this a candy wrapped up inside of a protein bar? And that's exactly what it is. I mean, we've been talking about them here on the Locked On Eagles podcast for years, and rightfully so. The best tasting protein bar out there. They're one of the best sponsors. They're always hooking up our fans. And if you're one of those fans that wants to get hooked up with a great, delicious, 100% real covered in chocolate Built Bar, go to Built.com today. Make sure you go there and use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED 15, to get 15% off of your order. You can always order the favorites that they have every single time. Mint brownie is my favorite. You can order their exclusive birthday cake. Check it out. They just sent us a box. These things are out of control. Heat them up a little bit in the microwave. Maybe put them over your favorite dessert just to feel less guilt and more refreshed. Go to Built.com today. Use LOCKED15 as your promo code to get 15% off at Built.com. All right, everybody, welcome on back to finish up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. As always, Gino Cammilleri here to finish up this 5th of 5 episodes of the week. Your first listen each and every day. Make sure you check out and make it your first watch or first read. Go to YouTube to make it your first watch. Go to Fox 43 to read all of the insight that Lou is putting out there. I jumped on there talking about the draft the other day. Great partners over at our Tegna station there in Pennsylvania. And always make sure you're tuning into all the shows here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team each and every day. But our team here on the Locked On Eagles podcast is the Philadelphia Eagles, of course. And what do I love more than gambling on the Philadelphia Eagles? Absolutely nothing at all. And that's what we're going to talk about. These lines presented by BetOnline.net, your favorite sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're taking a look at week 1 against the Detroit Lions, the Eagles. 4-point underdogs over under of 46.5. How I'm looking at this game, a 4-point favorite right now against a Detroit Lions team that they're getting better. Don't get me wrong, they're getting better. But after that result last year with Jared Goff, I don't know how to look at this team. But I do know one thing. The Philadelphia Eagles can score points in Detroit. I'm taking the Philadelphia Eagles -4, and I'm taking over 46.5. And why I'm doing that? Well, they put up a boatload of points last year, folks, if we don't remember. First 40-point outing for Jalen Hurts. That offense really got cooking. Nick Sirianni really found his stride. The Detroit Lions, they've gotten better, but not that much better. It's going to be less than a calendar year. Jared Goff is still playing quarterback for that team. I have to roll with the Eagles as the favorites. I think that line is going to jump a little bit more as we get into the season. Maybe the Eagles make one or two additional moves that really puts them in closer contention to a playoff team on paper. It's going to be tough for a Detroit Lions team with what they have to produce enough points to beat the Eagles. But I think overall, I think they'll probably be around 55 to 60 points scored between these two teams. But right at home, that the Eagles, I think they come out big week one, maybe put up a double-digit win. They like to do that on week one. You look at the Washington game a couple years ago, Fletcher Cox ends it with a strip sack. They go up and they win by nearly 15 points. That Jacksonville game where they're down 17-0 at half, they end up winning by about 16 points. This Eagles team loves to put up an odd number in week one, especially against a team like the Detroit Lions. No excuses at all in this game. Talking about total wins, over or under, 9 wins for the Philadelphia Eagles. It's a favorite that they go over at minus 135, and they're dogs to go under at plus 105. We do know how many wins they had last year, right? We do know that they had 9 wins, that they were a 9-8 team who made the playoffs. Shockingly so. They finish 9-9, of course, losing to Tampa Bay. But to look at this and say that this team on paper is not incredibly more well put together in terms of offense, is not better set up for success in terms of defense and how that can run within Jonathan Gannon's scheme. To think with the strength of schedule that they have, that they won't win over 9 games at minus 135, I'm going over at minus 135 all day long. This Philadelphia Eagles team is going to be set up for a 10 to 11 win season. Just looking at the schedule from a quick glance, you could even add some surprise upsets in there with the strength of the NFC. I think this team wins 10 to 11 games. I think 9 is a crazy number, especially after coming off of last season. And does that make them a playoff team? Well, right now, it showed to be the favorites that the Eagles are a playoff team at minus 135 for yes, plus 105 for no. After my speech that I just gave, how can I not say yes? How can I not agree with this team at plus or minus 135 to make the playoffs? After they made the playoffs last year in a harder NFC, with more quarterback talent in this conference, with a worse roster, in a first-year head coach, with a first-year quarterback who's starting, without A.J. Brown or Jordan Davis or Nakobe Dean or Hassan Riddick or Kaiser White, a healthy Davian Taylor, a healthy offensive line that's only gotten deeper. I got to say this Eagles team is making the playoffs, folks. Like it just, to me, now with the expectations there, that is the expectation. The playoffs is the floor. For Jalen Hurts, that's got to be the floor. For a guy who's battling to be the number 1 quarterback in this city, you have to believe that they are going to be a playoff team that expects to go beyond the first round. And what's the easiest way to make the playoffs? Is it via the wild card? Absolutely not. Nope, it's to win the division. Are the Eagles favorites to win the division right now? No, they're the second highest favorites. Dallas is at plus 110. The Eagles are at plus 200. And never in my life here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, just kidding, I did this last year, but I'm going to right my wrong. Are the Eagles going to win the division? In my opinion, I believe they are. The Eagles are going to win this division. The Dallas Cowboys have Mike McCarthy as their head coach. We do know this, right? They lose Amari Cooper, lose Lyle Collins, still are paying Ezekiel Elliott quadruple $1 million, like an absurd amount of money, way more than he should be making. The defense, they lose some key pieces that they had there last year. Trevon Diggs had the best season of a cornerback in quite some time in Dallas. Can he repeat that? I think there are a lot of factors. And, I mean, we didn't even mention Randy Gregory isn't there anymore. The Eagles' trajectory is up to me. Dallas, to me, is down. I know we're super biased here on the Locked On Eagles podcast against this team. I just look at it and say, I don't believe the Dallas Cowboys are as good as they were the last couple years when, quote, they were Super Bowl contenders. Well, they didn't get there. And I believe they've gotten worse in this offseason. The Eagles on paper have gotten much, much better. We're walking away. Yes, the Eagles are going to win this division, folks. And we're going to be talking about it all season long here at the Locked On Podcast Network and here at Locked On Eagles. Thank you for making us your first listen of each and every day. And now make Locked On NFL your second listen. The schedule's out. They're talking about it. We're all talking about it on the airwaves. A bunch of shows went live on the Locked On Podcast Network to talk about it. And they'll be covering your favorite team as well. If it isn't the Eagles, if it is the Eagles, we're here to get you covered. We're here on your airwaves on Odyssey, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud. Make sure you go there to listen, rate, subscribe. Give us a 5-star like to promote the show. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. LOE to 1K. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers here before the season begins. A ton of stuff coming out that is exclusive from us to you via YouTube. Make sure you go subscribe there as well. Check out the written work that we put out, all the stuff that we're talking on our Tegna partnership at Fox43. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. Follow myself at GC24_football. Lou DiBiase, follow him on Twitter at DiBiase LOE. Shout out, Lou. Hopefully you get over that flu, my friend. Follow the mothership at Locked On Birds, and make sure you're following along all off season, during the season, in this 365-day NFL calendar that we have here. And it is the best league to cover. I'm happy each and every day I come out to host the Locked On Eagles podcast. So thank you for tuning in here 5 days a week on LOE. I'm Gino Cammilleri signing off. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for listening and subscribing. And fly, Eagles, fly.